Hello, family of the channel. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please leave a like and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. If you enjoy our content, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel to help us reach more people who need to hear testimonies from those who have faced life's greatest difficulties with Jesus Christ in their hearts. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. Today, you're going to see how I, a priest accused of using God's house for drug trafficking, managed to expose the real criminal and get my justice. My name is Samuel. I'm 47 years old, and for 15 years I was the proud priest of St. Jude's Church in the small, quiet town of Havenwood. My life was simple, dedicated to my community and my faith. I thought I knew what good and evil looked like, but I was wrong. The devil doesn't always come with horns. Sometimes he comes in a tailored suit, shaking your hand with a smile. The man who destroyed my life was named Marcus Thorne. He was a powerful real estate developer, the kind of man who saw our town not as a community, but as a map of opportunities. He had his eyes on the land where my church, St. Jude's, had stood for over a century. It was prime real estate, and he wanted it for a multi-million-dollar luxury condominium project. He offered to buy it, but our church was not for sale. It was a home for the homeless, a comfort for the grieving, and a cornerstone of Havenwood. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? It all happened during our annual Founders Day festival. It was a beautiful day, the church grounds filled with families, laughter, and the smell of barbecue. It was the best of what our community represented, unity and faith. I was serving lemonade, talking with parishioners, feeling truly blessed. That feeling of peace was the last I would know for a very long time. In an instant, that peace was shattered by the sound of sirens wailing, growing closer and closer until police cars swarmed the festival, screeching to a halt on the lawn. Confusion turned to panic. Officers poured out of their cars, their faces grim, pushing through the terrified crowd. I tried to ask what was happening, to calm people down, but they marched right past me, straight into the church. I followed them, my heart pounding in my chest. In front of the entire congregation, they started pulling donation boxes apart. Then, one of them held up a brick wrapped in plastic. It was cocaine. They found more, hidden in a compartment in the church cellar I never even knew existed. I stood there, paralyzed in disbelief. This had to be a nightmare. Then, I saw him. Marcus Thorne, standing near a news reporter he'd conveniently brought along. He was playing the part of the shocked community benefactor, his face a mask of fake horror. "It's a dark day for Havenwood," he said to the camera, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "To think this was happening right under our noses in a house of God. But I saw it, just for a second. A flicker of victory in his eyes. He had planned this all along. Before I could even process the betrayal, the cold steel of handcuffs closed around my wrists. My pleas of innocence were drowned out by the clicking of cameras and the horrified gasps of the people I had dedicated my life to serving. Children I had baptized were watching as I was dragged away like a common criminal. The faces of my parishioners, once filled with warmth and respect, were now twisted with shock and disgust. In that moment, I lost everything: my freedom, my reputation, and my flock. The next few days were a blur of shame and humiliation. The media branded me the cartel priest. My picture was on every news channel. The diocese immediately suspended me, not even waiting for a trial. They stripped me of my duties and evicted me from the rectory, the only home I had known for over a decade. I was cast out, left with nothing but the clothes on my back, and an accusation so vile it felt like poison in my soul. I felt completely and utterly abandoned, not just by my community, but by God Himself. The initial shock slowly curdled into a cold, hard anger. I would walk down the streets of the town I loved, and the people I had counseled and prayed with would cross to the other side to avoid me. Someone spat on the ground as I walked out of the courthouse after my bail hearing. The prosecutor mocked my fall from grace in open court. Every glance, every whisper was another nail in the coffin of the life I once had. I was no longer Father Samuel. I was a monster in their eyes. The final, devastating blow came when I learned the fate of St. Jude's. Because of the scandal, the church was condemned, deemed a crime scene, and a place of corruption. The diocese agreed to sell the land to the city, which in turn sold it directly to Marcus Thorne's development company. He had won. He was going to tear down my church, our sanctuary, and build his monument to greed on its ashes. That was when my crisis of faith turned into a quiet, steely resolve. I may have been a man of God, but before I entered the seminary I was something else entirely. I was an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corporate corruption. I had left that life behind, believing I could do more good through faith. But as I sat in a rundown motel room, watching the news report about the planned demolition of St. Jude's, I realized that God had given me a particular set of skills for a reason. My old life wasn't a mistake. It was training. My mission was no longer just about clearing my name. This was a divine mandate to expose the evil that had desecrated a holy place. This wasn't about personal vengeance. It was about justice. Thorne had used the house of the Lord to hide his sins, and I would use the truth to bring his entire empire crashing down. He had made me a scapegoat, but he had underestimated his victim. He forgot that sometimes the shepherd has to become a wolf to protect the flock. My faith was tested in the fire of this betrayal, but it was not broken. It was forged into something stronger. I began to pray not for my old life back, but for strength and clarity. I read the Bible, and a particular verse stuck with me, becoming my guiding principle. Luke chapter 8, verse 17. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Marcus Thorne had hidden his evil in the shadows, and I would be the one to drag it into the light. My name is Samuel, and at 47 years old, my life's calling was to be the shepherd of St. Jude's Church. For 15 years, that was my identity, my purpose. But that life was stolen from me on a sunlit afternoon, amidst the laughter of children and the warmth of my community. The man who orchestrated my downfall, Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer with a soul as barren as the concrete lots he coveted, framed me for drug trafficking simply to get his hands on the land my church stood on. Listen to this story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? It all began during our annual Founders Day festival. The one day a year all of Havenwood came together on the church lawn. The air was thick with the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sound of a local band playing. I was serving lemonade, sharing stories with families I'd known for years. It was a perfect picture of everything I held dear: faith, community, and simple joy. I remember thinking in that moment how truly blessed I was. It was a peace I would not feel again for a very long time, the calm before a storm I never saw coming. Then, the sound of sirens cut through the music, growing from a distant wail to a deafening roar. Police cruisers swarmed the festival, their tires tearing up the grass where children had been playing moments before. Panic rippled through the crowd as officers, their faces grim and unreadable, pushed past bewildered families. I moved forward, trying to understand, to be the voice of calm. But they marched right past me and into the sanctuary, their boots echoing on the sacred floor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I followed them inside. In front of everyone, my parishioners, my friends, the families I had served, they began their search. They ripped open donation boxes, their actions a brutal violation of our sacred space. Then, an officer held up a brick of white powder, wrapped in plastic. It was cocaine. They found more, stashed away in a hidden compartment in the church cellar, a space I never even knew existed. A wave of nausea washed over me. This couldn't be real. It was a waking nightmare, and I was at the center of it all, completely helpless. That's when I saw him, Marcus Thorne, standing off to the side with a news reporter he had conveniently brought along. He put on a masterful performance, his face a mask of feigned shock and sorrow. A dark day for Havenwood, he declared for the cameras, his voice dripping with false piety. To think this was happening in a house of God. But for a fleeting second, our eyes met, and I saw it clearly. A triumphant glint, the cold satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. In that instant, I knew he had done this. I wasn't born into the church. My beginnings were humble, in a small town where my father was a mechanic and my mother was a nurse. They weren't overly religious, but they instilled in me a powerful sense of right and wrong. They taught me that truth mattered and that you should always stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. That simple lesson became the foundation of my entire life, long before I ever thought of wearing a priest's collar. It was a compass that pointed me toward my first calling. Before I ever stepped into a seminary, I stepped into newsrooms. I became an investigative journalist, driven by a relentless need to expose the truth. My focus was on corporate corruption, on the powerful men who hid their crimes behind slick PR campaigns and armies of lawyers. I was good at it. I could see patterns others missed, connect dots that seemed miles apart, and persuade people to share secrets they had been terrified to speak aloud. I believed I was fighting the good fight, one headline at a time. I remember one case in particular, a chemical company that was poisoning a town's water supply and covering it up. I spent a year digging, living out of cheap motels, and earning the trust of scared employees. When the story finally broke, it brought the company to its knees and got justice for the families. It was a huge victory, but it also left me feeling empty. I had exposed one evil, but it felt like cutting one head off a hydra. 2 more would just grow in its place. The world's darkness felt overwhelming. That feeling of cynicism began to eat away at me. I started to wonder if I was really changing anything or just profiting from other people's misery. One night, sitting alone in my apartment after another grueling investigation, I felt a profound sense of despair. I felt lost. On an impulse I still can't fully explain, I walked into an old church down the street, one I'd passed 1,000 times without a second glance. I sat in the back pew, not to pray but just to be quiet. And in that silence I felt a peace I had never known. That night was the beginning of a profound shift in my life. The call to serve God wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky, but a quiet, persistent whisper in my heart. It was a call to build, not just to expose, to heal, not just to wound. I realized I wanted to fight darkness not with headlines and outrage, but with faith, compassion, and community. I wanted to help people find the same peace I had found in that empty church, so I left my career behind to answer that call. My family thought I was crazy. My editor told me I was throwing away a brilliant career. But I had never been more certain of anything in my life. The seminary was challenging, a world away from the fast-paced life of a journalist, but it was exactly what my soul needed. It stripped away my pride and my cynicism, replacing them with humility and a renewed sense of purpose. I was learning to serve a higher truth, one that couldn't be confined to the front page of a newspaper. After my ordination, I was sent to a small, struggling parish in the inner city. The church was falling apart, and the congregation was weary, but we worked together. We painted the walls, started a food pantry in the basement, and created an after-school program for the neighborhood kids. I learned that a church isn't just a building, it's the hands and hearts of the people inside it. It's a living, breathing testament to God's love. It was there I learned what it truly meant to be a shepherd. Then came the assignment to St. Jude's in Havenwood. The church was historic and beautiful, but it had grown disconnected from the community. The congregation was small, mostly older folks. My mission was to breathe new life into it, to make it the true heart of the town once more. I saw its potential not as a monument to the past, but as a beacon for the future. I poured every ounce of my energy into that vision, determined to make it a sanctuary for all. We started a homeless outreach program, turning the old parish hall into a temporary shelter during the winter. We partnered with local businesses for job training programs. We hosted community events like the Founders Day Festival that brought everyone together, regardless of their faith. Slowly but surely, St. Jude's transformed. It was no longer just a place for Sunday worship. It was a place of refuge, a source of help, and a center of community life 7 days a week. I came to know everyone in Havenwood. I baptized their children, officiated their weddings, and held their hands as they said goodbye to loved ones. I wasn't just Father Samuel, the priest. I was Sam, their friend, their confidant, their neighbor. The trust they placed in me was the most sacred thing in my life. It was a bond forged through years of shared joys and sorrows, a testament to the community we had all built together. This was my life's work. It was about 5 years into my time at St. Jude's that I first met Marcus Thorne. He was charming, a pillar of the business community, and he came to me with a generous offer to buy the church land. He spoke of progress and development, of a new future for Havenwood. I listened politely, but I told him that our church was not for sale. Its value wasn't in the land it sat on, but in the lives it touched. It was a home for the soul, and that had no price tag. He didn't give up. His offers became more generous, his tone more insistent. He started talking about how the old building was an eyesore, how his luxury condos would bring in so much more tax revenue for the town. He tried to turn members of the town council against me, painting me as an obstacle to progress. I saw his greed, his relentless ambition, but I was naive. I never imagined the depths of wickedness he was capable of to get what he wanted. Looking back, I see how he laid the groundwork for my destruction. He was planting seeds of doubt, preparing the soil for the lies he would eventually sow. Everything I had built, the community programs, the trust, the reputation of St. Jude's as a place of safety and compassion, was what he saw as an obstacle. And so, it was exactly what he decided to target and corrupt in the most vile way imaginable. He didn't just want to tear down a building. He wanted to tear down its spirit. My entire life, both as a journalist and as a priest, was dedicated to the truth. I had built my world on a foundation of faith, integrity, and the trust of my community. And with one despicable act, Marcus Thorne turned all of it to ash. He used my life's work against me, twisting a place of worship into a crime scene and turning the people I loved into a jury that condemned me without a trial. He took everything. It is so important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. By doing so, you help us spread the gospel through real-life testimonies. So please help us in this noble cause. The first few days after my arrest were a blur of concrete and steel. I sat in a cold, sterile holding cell, the smell of disinfectant and despair thick in the air. The shock had worn off, replaced by a chilling clarity. I was no longer Father Samuel, a shepherd to his flock. I was inmate 4782, a man accused of a crime so heinous it felt like a brand on my soul. My prayers echoed unanswered off the graffiti-scarred walls. I had never felt so completely and utterly alone, abandoned by the very world I had dedicated my life to serving. My bail hearing was a public crucifixion. I stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, my hands shackled, while the prosecutor painted me as a monster hiding behind a clerical collar. He called my life's work a sham, a cover for a criminal enterprise. I looked out at the gallery, searching for a friendly face. But all I saw were the people I once called my friends and neighbors, their eyes filled with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. Their silent judgment was louder than any gavel. I was condemned long before a trial could even begin. The media frenzy was relentless. They nicknamed me the cartel priest. My face was plastered across every news channel, every newspaper front page. They dug into my past, twisting my years as a journalist into a narrative of a man who knew how to operate in the shadows. Every report was another shovel of dirt on the grave of my reputation. I watched my life being rewritten into a lie, and I was powerless to stop it. The truth didn't matter. The story was just too good for them to pass up. Then came the official letter from the diocese. It arrived via a cold, emotionless courier. It wasn't a letter of support or a promise to investigate. It was a formal, legal document of suspension. It spoke of the integrity of the church and the gravity of the accusations. There was no compassion, no benefit of the doubt. In the sterile language of bureaucracy, 15 years of my life, my faith, my service were erased. I was officially an outcast, cut off from the only family I had left. The eviction was the final, brutal severing. Two stern-faced church administrators watched me pack a single cardboard box from the rectory. My books, my photos, the small wooden cross my mother gave me, my entire life condensed into a sad, pathetic pile. They followed me to the door, their faces impassive, and locked it behind me. As I stood on the sidewalk, holding my box, I realized I was not only stripped of my title, but I was also homeless. The church I had called home had cast me out into the street. I spent that first night in my beat-up old car, parked in the shadowed corner of a supermarket lot. Every passing headlight felt like an accusation. I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the rectory's silhouette against the night sky, a place that was once a beacon of warmth and safety, now just a building full of ghosts. The comfort of my own bed had been replaced by the cold vinyl of a car seat. This wasn't just a loss of a home. It was the loss of my entire world, my sanctuary. The next morning I walked into a small diner for a cheap cup of coffee. A woman who I'd counseled through the loss of her husband saw me, and her face hardened. She grabbed her children's hands, pulled them close, and hurried across the street as if I were contagious. The pain of that small, simple act of rejection was sharper than any insult. It was a clear message. You are no longer one of us. You are something to be feared and avoided. The isolation was a physical weight on my shoulders. When I tried to use my debit card to pay for the coffee, it was declined. I called the bank, and a nervous clerk informed me that my accounts had been frozen as part of the ongoing criminal investigation. I was penniless. The small savings I had, the money I'd carefully set aside from my modest priest salary, was gone. Marcus Thorne hadn't just taken my reputation and my home. He had taken my ability to even survive, to buy a simple meal. He was starving me out, body and soul. From my booth in that diner, I overheard two men talking about the news. They spoke my name with such casual contempt, fully believing the headlines. "Can you believe it? A priest," one of them said, shaking his head. "Just goes to show you can't trust anyone." I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them the truth, to defend myself. But what could I say? I was a walking headline, a caricature of a villain. I just paid for my coffee with the last few dollars in my pocket and walked away, their words echoing in my ears. A week later, the ultimate symbol of my defeat appeared. A massive sign was erected on the lawn of St. Jude's, its bold letters spelling out, "Future home of the Havenwood Towers," a Marcus Thorne development. He wasn't even waiting for the dust to settle. He was parading his victory for the entire town to see, building his monument of greed on the ashes of my life's work. Seeing his name plastered over the place I held sacred felt like a desecration all over again. In my desperation, I tried calling old friends from the seminary, men I had studied and prayed with for years. The calls were awkward and short. Most didn't pick up at all. One, a bishop now, told me it was best if we didn't speak until this was resolved. He advised me to pray for forgiveness. He had already judged and sentenced me. The brotherhood I had cherished, the men I considered my spiritual family, had turned their backs on me completely. The only person who reached out was a young man named Leo. I had mentored him years ago when he was a troubled kid, a brilliant but reckless computer hacker heading down a dangerous path. I had helped him find a job, get his life straight. He called me from a blocked number. "Father Sam," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't believe a word of it. Whatever you need, I'm here. I owe you." In a world of abandonment, his single voice of loyalty was a lifeline in a raging sea. My humiliation was amplified by Thorne's continued success. I saw him on a local news broadcast, accepting a Community Builder of the Year award. He stood at a podium, smiling his predator's smile, talking about his vision for a new and prosperous Havenwood. He was being celebrated as a hero while I was hiding in the shadows, living off the charity of the one person who still believed in me. The injustice of it all was a bitter poison, and I drank it down every single day. There was a night I truly hit bottom. Huddled in a cheap motel room that smelled of stale smoke, I fell to my knees, not to pray, but to scream at the ceiling. "Why?" I yelled, tears of rage and sorrow streaming down my face. Why have you forsaken me?" All my years of faith, of trust in God's plan, felt like a cruel joke. In that dark, lonely room, my faith shattered. I felt an emptiness so profound, so absolute, that it threatened to swallow me whole. I was truly lost. The public's contempt wasn't just passive. One afternoon, as I was walking back to my motel, a car slowed down beside me. A teenager I didn't recognize leaned out the window and threw a half-empty soda cup at me, the sticky liquid splashing all over my worn-out jacket. "God's not listening, you freak," he yelled before the car sped off. It was a small thing, but it was the final straw. I was no longer a person to them. I was an object of scorn, a target for their casual cruelty. My court-appointed lawyer was a young, overworked public defender who looked at me with tired, pitying eyes. It was clear he believed I was guilty. He didn't talk about fighting the charges or proving my innocence. He talked about plea bargains. "They have a lot of evidence, Father," he said, not even bothering to hide his skepticism. "We can probably get you a reduced sentence if you cooperate." I was being advised to confess to a crime I didn't commit. The system was designed to crush me. Sometimes, in the dead of night, memories would surface with painful clarity. I'd remember the joy on a young couple's face as I pronounced them husband and wife at the altar of St. Jude's. I'd remember the sound of the children's choir practicing for Christmas Eve. These memories were once a source of comfort, but now they were instruments of torture. They were ghosts of a life that was not just gone, but had been stolen and corrupted, a beautiful painting defaced beyond recognition. The stress was taking a visible toll. I stopped eating, I barely slept. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a store window, and I barely recognized the man staring back. My face was gaunt, my eyes were hollow and haunted, and my hair was flecked with more gray than I remembered. I looked like a fugitive, a shell of the man I once was. The fall from grace wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical decay I could see in my own reflection. Then came the day of the demolition. I couldn't stay away. I stood across the street, a ghost watching his own funeral, as the giant wrecking ball swung toward the bell tower of St. Jude's. The first impact was a deafening crunch of brick and stone, a sound that seemed to shatter something deep inside my chest. With every blow that landed on that sacred building, I felt a piece of my own soul crumbling to dust. They were literally erasing my past, my purpose, my home. But as I stood there, watching the walls of my church fall, something unexpected happened. The profound grief, the paralyzing despair, began to recede. It was being replaced by something else, something harder and colder. It was the quiet, simmering heat of righteous anger. The sight of Thorne's victory, so total and so brutal, didn't break me. It ignited a spark in the deepest, darkest part of my soul. I had wept enough. I had mourned enough. I realized that my old life was gone forever. There was no going back to being Father Samuel of St. Jude's. That man died when the first police car screeched onto the church lawn. Marcus Thorne had intended to destroy me, to leave me as nothing more than rubble, just like my church. But he had made a critical mistake. He had forgotten who I was before I was a priest. He had forgotten that I knew how to dig for secrets. I thought about my first career, about the relentless investigative journalist I used to be. I remembered the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of exposing a lie and bringing a powerful man to his knees. That part of me hadn't died. It had only been sleeping. I had traded my reporter's notepad for a Bible, but the skills were still there, dormant and waiting. God had given me a particular set of talents, and I now understood He had a different purpose for them. My crisis of faith found a new direction. I began to pray again, but it was a different kind of prayer. I didn't ask for my old life back. I didn't ask for comfort or for this nightmare to end. I prayed for strength. I prayed for focus. I prayed for the clarity to see the path through the darkness. I asked God to sharpen my mind and harden my will for the war that was to come. This was no longer about me. This was about justice. That evening, I used the last of my cash to buy a cheap, second-hand laptop from a pawn shop. I took it back to my motel room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the darkness. I opened a secure messaging app and typed a single name, Leo. A moment later, 3 dots appeared, followed by a reply. "I've been waiting for your call, Father. What's our first move?" The fight had begun. The shepherd was gone. A hunter was taking his place. Leo's voice on the other end of the line was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in months. It was calm, steady, and completely devoid of judgment. He didn't ask if I was guilty. He already knew the answer. "I'm in, Father Sam," he said simply. "I never forgot what you did for me. You pulled me out of the fire. Now it's my turn." In that moment, I wasn't just a disgraced priest. I was a commander with a single, loyal soldier ready for a war. You see, Marcus Thorne saw a priest. He saw a man who turned the other cheek, a man who spoke of forgiveness and mercy. He never bothered to look deeper, to ask who I was before I wore the collar. He saw a shepherd, and he assumed I had forgotten how to be anything else. He never imagined that before I learned to save souls, I spent a decade learning how to dismantle empires built on lies, one document, one source, one thread at a time. This was his fatal miscalculation. My past as an investigative journalist wasn't something I spoke of often. I had left that world of cynicism and shadows behind for a reason. But the skills, they never leave you. The patience to sift through mountains of data for a single inconsistency. The instinct for finding the weakest person in a corrupt system. The relentless, methodical focus of a hunter on the trail. God had given me these gifts for a purpose, and I finally understood it wasn't just to write headlines. It was to serve his justice. Leo was my hidden weapon, the resource Thorne could never have anticipated. Years ago, he was a brilliant but reckless teenager, a cybercriminal, using his genius for petty theft and vandalism. The authorities saw a menace. I saw a lost boy with a powerful mind. I spoke for him in court, mentored him, and helped him channel his skills into a legitimate career in cybersecurity. He now owed me a debt he was more than eager to repay, and his keyboard was about to become my sword. Our war room was my dingy motel room, our communication conducted through encrypted channels. My first order to Leo was clear: ignore the drugs. That was Thorne's trap, a spectacle designed to distract. The real crime, the real motive, was buried in his finances. He didn't do this just for a piece of land, Leo. I told him. This is about something bigger. Follow the money. It will never lie. I was trading my pulpit for a strategy session, and it felt like coming home. Leo was a digital phantom. He moved through the internet's back alleys with an artistry that was breathtaking. He began by mapping Thorne's corporate empire. On the surface, it was a clean, respectable development company. But underneath, Leo uncovered a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and ghost partnerships. It was a structure designed not just to avoid taxes, but to make money disappear completely. Thorne wasn't just a developer. He was a magician of illicit finance. My job was to provide the human element. While Leo navigated the digital world, I navigated the world of memory. I spent hours meditating, not just in prayer, but in recollection. I listed every contractor Thorne had ever hired, every employee I had ever spoken to, every town official who seemed a little too friendly with him. I was building a psychological profile, searching for the cracks in his real-world foundation. My pastoral knowledge of the community became my database. Every night, before Leo and I would begin our work, I would open my Bible. My crisis of faith had transformed into a conviction. I found my mission in Luke chapter 8, verse 17, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." This was not about personal revenge. This was a holy mandate. I was an instrument tasked with dragging Thorne's evil from the darkness he hid it in and exposing it to the unforgiving light of truth. Our first real target was Thorne's main server. It was a digital fortress, protected by layers of security that even Leo found daunting. For a week, he tried every trick he knew, but the walls held firm. Despair began to creep back in. It felt like Thorne was untouchable, a ghost in a machine we couldn't crack. "He's too good, Father," Leo admitted one night, his voice laced with frustration. This system is airtight. But Thorn had protected his data, not his people. That's when my old journalistic instincts took over. If you can't break down the door, find someone who has the key, I told Leo. I went back to my list of names and focused on one, Arthur Vance, a brilliant architect Thorn had fired and publicly humiliated over a contract dispute a year ago. A proud man who had been wronged. A man with a grudge. A man who would have known the intimate details of Thorn's operations. Arthur was our key. I didn't call him or approach him directly. That would have been too suspicious. Instead, I learned his routine. I found the small coffee shop where he went every morning at 7 a.m. I sat in a corner booth for 3 days, just watching. On the fourth day, I accidentally spilled my coffee as he walked by. It was an old reporter's trick. It started a conversation, and I used the gentle, empathetic tone of a priest to listen to his troubles. I didn't ask about Thorn. I asked about him. Arthur was a broken man, his confidence shattered. As he spoke, I could see the pain of Thorn's betrayal still fresh in his eyes. He talked about his stolen designs, his ruined reputation. Then, in a moment of bitter reflection, he let something slip. He mentioned Thorn's paranoia, how he kept his most sensitive project files on a private, air-gapped server in the basement of an old, forgotten property he owned downtown, completely separate from the main network. It was the whisper I had been praying for. I relayed the information to Leo, and it was like a dam had broken. The physical location was everything. It wasn't about a frontal assault on a digital fortress anymore. It was about finding a leaky pipe in the basement. Leo immediately shifted his focus, targeting the building's outdated network security. The climate control systems, the smart lighting. He wasn't trying to hack Thorn. He was hacking the building itself. Within hours, he found a vulnerability. He piggybacked on a signal from a faulty thermostat, creating a tiny, invisible backdoor into the building's internal network. From there, he was able to access the isolated server room. The data wasn't protected by the same corporate firewalls, because Thorn believed its physical separation was enough. He was arrogant. He believed no one would ever know what was there. Suddenly, we had bypassed all of his expensive security and were standing at the digital door to his darkest secrets. Thorn was still attending galas, accepting awards, and smiling for the cameras, a celebrated visionary. He believed he had won, that the quiet priest he had crushed was a forgotten piece of rubble. He had no idea that from a cheap motel room, that same priest was now watching his every move, sifting through his hidden ledgers and preparing to bring his entire corrupt world crashing down. He had silenced a shepherd, but in doing so, he had awakened a hunter who had God on his side. Before I reveal how the revenge took place, it is very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. By doing so, you help us spread the gospel through real-life testimonies. So please, help us in this noble cause. With the server's contents laid bare, we discovered Thorn's sins were far worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just about laundering money. It was a detailed ledger of his entire criminal enterprise. There were names of cartel contacts, shipping manifests, and blueprints for his other buildings, all marked with hidden compartments designed to move drugs and cash. He hadn't just framed me to get a piece of land. He had used my church, a house of God, as a temporary warehouse for his filth. The sheer, cold-blooded organization of his evil was staggering. It was the work of a man who believed himself completely above God and the law. We didn't just have evidence. We had his entire confession written in spreadsheets and encrypted emails. For the next 2 weeks, Leo and I worked with the focus of monks. We didn't just download the data. We curated it. We built a digital dossier, a clean, undeniable narrative of Thorn's crimes, complete with timelines, highlighted bank records, and a recorded, voice-disguised testimony from the architect, Arthur Vance, corroborating the blueprints. We were not just leaking information. We were building a cage made of pure, irrefutable truth, and we were about to hand Marcus Thorn the key. The final battlefield had to be symbolic. It had to be a place of his own choosing, his moment of ultimate triumph. And he provided it for us. The local paper announced the official groundbreaking ceremony for the Havenwood Towers to be held on the now flattened land where my church, St. Jude's, had once stood. He was going to celebrate his victory on a graveyard of my life's work. I read the announcement, and a cold calm washed over me. It was perfect. He would be brought down on holy ground, even if the building was gone. The plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. While I prepared a final anonymous package for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, Leo focused on the groundbreaking ceremony itself. Thorne had planned a lavish media event, complete with giant video screens to broadcast his speech and corporate logos. Leo, my digital ghost, found a way into the event's A/V network through the vendor's insecure Wi-Fi. He wouldn't just crash the party. He would become the director of it, waiting for my signal to change the show. On the day of the ceremony, I sat in my old, beat-up car across the street, a ghost watching my own vindication. I saw Marcus Thorne take the podium, smiling under the bright sun, a portrait of success. He spoke of renewal and progress, his voice oozing the same false sincerity I remembered from the day of my arrest. The crowd of investors and politicians applauded. He raised his hands, basking in their admiration on the very spot where my altar used to be. As he began to speak about a brighter future for Havenwood, I sent Leo a one-word text, "Now." The giant screens behind Thorne flickered. His corporate logo vanished, replaced by the breaking news headline from a national news agency we had tipped off. Thorne Development implicated in cartel money laundering scheme. Then, images began to flash across the screens for everyone to see. Bank statements from his offshore accounts, blueprints with the hidden compartments circled in red, excerpts from his own incriminating emails. The applause died, replaced by a wave of shocked gasps. At that exact moment, the distant sound of sirens grew into a deafening roar as a convoy of FBI vehicles swarmed the event. Thorne stood frozen for a second, his face a mask of disbelief turning to pure, unadulterated rage. He was cut off mid-sentence as federal agents stormed the stage and placed him in handcuffs. As they led him away, his eyes frantically scanned the crowd, the town that had adored him just moments before. His gaze swept past the chaos and locked directly onto mine. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply reached into my shirt, pulled out the small wooden cross my mother had given me, and held it up for a moment before letting it fall back against my chest. Then, I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the ruins of his empire behind me,